everybody. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene podcast. I'm your host, Jill Sitnick. Think of me as your psychedelic big sister. And today's conversation is a really important one. You know, on this podcast, we talk a lot about healing and trauma and transformation. And today we are going to talk about end of life because it sometimes doesn't get enough attention. And how can psychedelic therapy completely change one's attitude and anxiety around end of life? I'm joined by John from Theraspil. I hope I always pronounce that correctly. It's a Canadian nonprofit working to expand access to psychedelic-assisted therapy for people facing serious illness and terminal illness. So this is an important conversation. I think it is a conversation that we shouldn't really be as uncomfortable with as we are. And so let's go ahead. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene podcast. Today, I am with John Gilchrist, and he is the Director of Communications at Theraspil. John, thank you for being here today.
My sincere pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really interested in this conversation. To our listeners, this is going to be a conversation that doesn't get touched on too much in the psychedelic circles because it's all about trauma and healing and things of that sort. And this is a different take on it. So with that said, with that little bit of an introduction, a little bit of a hook there, John, introduce yourself to the audience. Give us your origin story. How the heck do you find yourself chatting on the Psychedelic Scene podcast?
Well, my journey to psychedelics, I think, was not expected. And I've heard that shared amongst many folks that are working in this space, that it just was the right place at the right time. I happened to start working in my organization, Theraspil, at a point in my life where I was looking for a career change. It was right around COVID. I had just come out of university, and I began working with more or less a career counselor. And in those discussions, we established that I'm very interested in psychedelics, and had had some really powerful experiences with them as a young man in university. And she had just so happened to have been working with someone very recently, counseling them, who had just broken into the psychedelic space. And we connected, we exchanged emails, and realized that we had actually met a few years before at a music festival and had done a psychedelic experience together. And that then led to me getting connected with a whole bunch of other folks in the psychedelic space. I started volunteering at Theraspil, this organization. And from basically after a couple of months of volunteering, someone left and I took their job, and it took off from there. But I'd say I'm an ardent supporter of drug policy reform, and I really believe in the psychedelic space. I think that's really why I'm working here. And I do also have a passion for connecting with people and meeting people and communicating their stories. My background is in theater and TV and film, so passionate storyteller, and I try to use those skills to bring people over to the good side of psychedelic-assisted therapy and show them that these are not something to fear, rather something to treat with intrigue and awe. So that's kind of how I found myself here and how I found myself speaking to you, Joe.
Yeah. So you're up in Canada. Give us an idea of, us down here to the south of you. Give us an idea of what Theraspil does, why you exist. The website's gorgeous. So go ahead. Tell us all about it.
Thank you very much. Theraspil is a nonprofit, a Canadian nonprofit. We're focused on access to psychedelic therapy, especially for people with serious illness. So we began by helping patients legally access psilocybin to treat end-of-life distress. So, great question. So we have two core programs at Theraspil for two molecules. So our flagship program is it's called Fundamentals of Psilocybin-Assisted Psychotherapy. So this is practical knowledge in how to provide psychedelic-assisted therapy to patients. There is a bit of a Canadian lens to this, but we've had lots of folks from the States, but also folks from crazy places that we would have never expected to take our training, like from Sweden and Indonesia, and Switzerland. because you do get that practical knowledge in psychedelic therapy.
Okay.
So there's psilocybin, but then we also now have an MDMA-assisted psychotherapy program.
I saw
So
that. Yeah.
while for the majority of the folks that complete the training are registered clinical counselors or therapists, but we also have lots of nurses, physicians, end-of-life death doulas, and now a lot of coaches hoping to
Yes.
break into the space. So yeah, really at Theraspil, we have an interview-based system. So we don't want to close the door to folks who want to get this education. So what's required really is just an application and then an interview with me, actually, as the first step to joining the program. But yeah, we really see training as essential
Yes.
here in Canada. I know it's probably not quite the same in the States, but here in Toronto, Ontario, where I live, we have mushroom stores all over the place. There's dozens of
Yeah, it's not like
dispensaries.
here. I'm in Pennsylvania. That's not happening here.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the Canadian substance use report, like we get this report every few years, which shows what Canadians are using, basically. And it's showing year over year that more Canadians are trying psychedelics.
Yes.
And what's also rising is the amount of hospital visits related to psychedelics. So we know that people are using psychedelics. They're probably using it alone. We don't
With really high doses.
And of course, there's a difference between people recreationally using these substances and people seeking out therapeutic interventions with psychedelics. So that's where that latter one is where we come in. But we don't want people doing it alone. We want to have a robust, trusted group of healthcare professionals to whom we can refer patients, and we want them all across the country. So while Theraspil started in earnest in Victoria, British Columbia, we've now trained people from, I think, every province now in Canada. We haven't reached all the territories yet, but it's our goal to ensure that it's not just in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto, and Victoria that people can find a psychedelic therapist. We want to train people in every pocket of the country. And so we've moved training to online as well, which has allowed folks in other countries to join us.
Right.
But I think one thing that you might find interesting, Jill, and I think what sets Theraspil apart in the training space is that we have a core component of the program which involves practitioners actually using psychedelics themselves in experiential sessions. So we not only have been offering this as part of the training, we've also pursued the issue in federal court, because when we launched the program 5 years ago in 2021, we actually had 19 practitioners, which were a group of physicians, nurses, counselors, who were granted exemptions. The Minister of Health at that time agreed with Theraspil and the experts that they had actually hired at the government level to determine, is it important for practitioners to use psychedelics?
What's the definition of exemption?
So at that time, this was an exemption to the Canadian Drugs and Substances Act. So, dear Minister of Health, I would like to have possession of this substance to use it as part of my training program.
Oh, gotcha.
And
we're running clinical trials with theoretically practitioners and facilitators who have never taken an enhanced substance, and I don't understand how we're doing that. But anyway, go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So an exemption, I'd like to be able to legally be able to partake, so I know what my patient or client is going to experience.
Exactly. Not only does that improve the practitioner's personal experience, but it also provides a lot of comfort to patients, which a lot of people don't realize, that when a patient is experiencing a psychedelic, it can be
I want to talk to somebody who knows that what it went through, and it's okay. And yes,
if you have someone that's been there that says it's okay, you inherently, I trust that you've been here before. You know what I'm going through.
Yes.
So yeah, we've been pushing for the government to enact regulations not only for patients but for practitioners as well. And we've pursued this issue to the federal courts. So we're trying to get judges instead of bureaucrats to establish these regulations, to side with not only the 900 plus that we've trained, but what Health Canada and our government's own experts have already determined, that it's essential to do this. why can't we have some common sense, some compassion, and some science-backed support for our practitioners? So Theraspil, I think, is uniquely positioned to do a lot of this in that we're a nonprofit. We're not beholden to shareholders. We're beholden to stakeholders who are our community members, our trainees, the practitioners. So we're going to do what we think is right. And right now that is pursuing these issues in the courts.
Oh, 1,000%. So in your training, is there a specific, I'm going to use the word chapter or segment. Is there a particular segment that deals very specifically with end-of-life populations?
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to answer that earlier. Yes, absolutely. So we don't just focus on end of life. There are various other indications that are instructed. Really, we're just following clinical evidence. So we touch on end of life. We touch on
trauma,
treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, trauma, but also I know that now in the training programs, as the evidence is emerging, we're now touching on disordered eating and other really complex issues like cluster headache and other chronic pain, addiction. Absolutely. I'd say it's kind of framed with the end of life lens because that's really, that's why Theraspil started, was to support people at end of life.
Right.
And maybe to frame it a bit more for you, Jill, here in Canada, we have very liberal, what's called here medical assistance in dying legislation. So I believe in the States, it's called assisted suicide, and in Europe, it's euthanasia. But if a patient here in Canada has an irremediable condition, i.e. they're suffering from something that will kill them and they can't get better from it, they can appeal to the government to end their lives through MAID, through medical assistance in dying. And so at the time that MAID was becoming liberalized in around 2016, our founder, Bruce Tobin, was reading these incredible results from clinical studies at Johns Hopkins and New York University, UCLA, that show that psilocybin can really help people at end of life be comfortable with dying and relieve some of this palliative depression, end of life distress. And so the first thing was like, well, okay, if people have access to medical assistance in dying, they also need access to medical assistance in living through psychedelic therapy. And so that's really the issue that we're still dealing with here. People denied access to psychedelics and approved for medical assistance in dying, and one's got to come before the other. So that's really still what we're dealing with here, what we're fighting for people's charter rights to use medicines that can improve their lives, especially those at end of life. So it's a very hot topic here. And I think there's a bit of cognitive dissonance with this issue, that surely if we're providing medical death to people and providing that option, we need to have other safeguards. Like, can someone try a mushroom first? Surely they can.
Well, and I think that comes from the experience. As soon as you've taken an appropriately dosed mushroom journey in a safe environment, you realize 99% of all of the drama and concern is not warranted. It's the people who haven't worked with this particular substance who are the doom and gloom. All right, so I can 1,000% speak personally to the anxiety reduction around passing, or I would say the anxiety reduction around the sense that there is something else. I've had way too many conversations with some of my passed on ancestors that I'm pretty comfortable with it, without getting super woo-woo, because I don't want to alienate folks. From your perspective, and I want to phrase it a certain way, where's the clearest area that psilocybin therapy can help those at end of life? Where's the clearest spot?
From the folks that I've connected with, spoken to, heard from in the psychedelic space, specifically at Theraspil, it's the hopelessness related to death.
Right.
So there's no point in living. There's
no
can't
point
continue
in
on. Exactly. And there's this wonderful anecdote from Thomas Hartle. So Thomas Hartle was the first Canadian to legally access psilocybin.
Okay.
And was also just a total badass, just such a hero. Thomas was someone who I had the pleasure of meeting several times from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. He had something like 80 chemotherapy sessions. Thomas lived over 8 years with terminal cancer. He never turned down an interview. He would always show up if it meant that it could potentially his words could potentially provide some comfort to someone else in his position.
Wow.
Thomas, there's a video of him on our YouTube channel and on our website where he's speaking to Bruce Tobin, who is his therapist and also our founder. The video shows him the day before he's doing his psilocybin session. He's in tears. He's speaking about his anxiety about dying, which actually really connects to this hopeless feeling that he's leaving behind his family. He had 2 young kids at the time. And then we cut to the next day after Thomas has ingested his psilocybin, has had his session, and he's relaxed. He's petting his dog. And he describes how the day before he felt like he was being pulled behind a horse. And that day, the next day, he's now riding the horse. And he says, things just don't feel as hopeless. And it's as simple as that. And that's just one day removed from his session. So Thomas was able to carry that feeling over for a long time after that. It was very impactful for him. And Thomas did pass away last summer and is still just such a source of inspiration for not only my team, but so many other Canadians. He I think opened the door for a lot of folks and was just very brave in sharing his experiences. But you can see in his story that there's a glimmer of hope after a psilocybin-assisted therapy session for so many people. And in the wake of Thomas's story, many others have come forward to say it was Thomas Hartle's story that provided me with comfort and hope at the end of my life.
I've worked with psilocybin with folks for anxiety, not end of life. And usually there's kind of a perspective shift. There's a realization, oh, my father, XYZ, my mother, XYZ. Oh, these are the patterns I'm doing. And then there's kind of, with that realization or perspective shift, there is a calming because, hey, wait, I was kind of upset and it was all because of a story in my head, per se, right? With end of life, are they changing the story around passing? Are they healing past traumas? Are they reviewing their life? Can you give us a hint as to how some folks are responding?
Yeah, I think, Jill, a lot of the above.
Okay.
Healing past wounds is a big one that we hear a lot.
Okay.
For example, actually just this past week, a story was released on a podcast here called White Coat Black Art. It's a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company podcast.
Yeah.
With this guy, Pete Pearson, who I'm sure we'll chat more about today.
Okay.
He has a terminal illness. He's got idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. He used psilocybin to help alleviate end-of-life distress. And in his experience, I just listened to the episode, it was released on Saturday, this past weekend, he describes meeting all of his ancestors, his parents, his grandparents, his great-grandparents, and reconnecting with an infant child of his who passed away just a few days after being born, and seeing him as a grown man and connecting with him. And we hear a lot of stuff like this, and he did not have that intention going into the experience. Like, I want to reconnect with these folks. It's more so, how can I not be scared of dying? I could die any day. In the process of healing or beginning to heal these past wounds, you can find that presence, find that peace right now. So I think it's a lot of the above. It's healing past traumas, it's healing current traumas, your current situation. But I think a lot of these issues compound for patients that we're supporting. Everyone is different, but every single time, while the story is different, it's just brilliant to listen to. We were sharing in our group, in our team chat today, just how all of us listening to this episode, this is why we do what we do. This is just brilliant. Like, how can we be denying people access to these substances and these therapies when they can create these experiences or help to facilitate these experiences? It's just brilliant.
Right. And not approach a phase of life with the fear that we all have. I know my first spiritual experience was in a therapeutic psilocybin journey, and completely unexpected. And I didn't even register that there was a spiritualness to it until afterward, because my grandmothers were there. We were having a whole conversation, my therapist, my guide, and my 2 grandmothers. And it didn't even occur to me that this was a spiritual thing. I was like, no, they're right here. They're talking. I'm getting chewed out a little bit.
I mean, my grandparents were, and don't even get me started on my aunts, but through other kind of spiritual experiences, there's much more of a calmness around passing. I absolutely have the very natural human body fear. I don't want to be in a lot of pain. That's the human body stuff. What I will say is that it's an interesting, and for anybody who's listening going, oh my gosh, is it just too woo woo connecting with people who've passed, things of that sort? I'd like to remind everybody that what is in our head is in our head. And if it brings a sense of comfort the same way that thinking about, I don't know, a nice comfy blanket, or thinking about a hug that you had in childhood, or thinking about that award that you won. If something brings you a good feeling and it's not hurting anybody and it's really just aiding and helping your life, it's kind of okay. It's kind of okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'd also like to mention, maybe this is a bit scarier to consider, but folks that are taking psilocybin for these really complex and severe issues might more typically do a higher dose, like having a more heroic session with psilocybin.
Sure.
And what we've heard is, well, I mean, it's more or less clinically proven to have these ego dissolving experiences.
Yes.
In a sense, you cease to be yourself for this certain period of time. And we hear about this oneness with the universe, this connection to everyone else.
Yeah.
And someone once said, and I haven't been able to get out of my head, that you're kind of dead for a few hours. You are not yourself. You are
a little offline. You're a little offline.
Exactly. The highway that's usually operating is closed for the day, and there's a whole bunch of other mini highways that turn on, and that's not really your daily experience. And so coming out of that experience, you realize is it that scary to go there? No, it gives people a lot of comfort just coming out of a high dose experience like that in ways that are probably hard to explain to folks that haven't been there before. But
because you're kind of, I will say to anybody, just for safety, high dose means that you have a sitter. You are not doing high dose on your own. Because sometimes you do need a hand to hold to let you know that you are not drifting off into space. But the other side is that sometimes drifting off to space and like having to realize that you got to come back.
Yes.
But I would agree. I would agree. Probably a higher dose and a realization that there is something beyond just this experience in the body.
Yeah. And I think it was Dr. Carhart Harris, Robin Carhart Harris, who someone asked me a question about why can't we quantify this, like this ego death, and like why do we have so much trouble quantifying this, and how can we prove this in clinical studies? And he said something like, well, isn't it kind of emblematic, like isn't it the human experience is kind of brought into focus here with psychedelics? We don't know, and do we need to know? Isn't it kind of beautiful that we don't know? That's why are we here? All this stuff. It's like, do we need to quantify this? Can we not just listen to the folks? Exactly.
And can we, even in a non-enhanced state, get it? Is it something we can understand if we're not if that default mode network isn't shut off? I don't know. I don't know if we can. Yeah. All right. So now you got me super curious. You said we were probably going to talk about, I believe the gentleman's name was Pete. Did I get that name right?
Yeah.
Okay. Why are we going to be talking about Pete even more? Because so far his story is phenomenal, but I think there was something else.
Yeah. Well, Pistol Pete Pearson, that's what his family calls him.
Okay. That's awesome. All right.
It's the issues that we have here in Canada with psychedelics, I think, are fully realized through Pistol, and really show why this regulation, like Pete's story is why Theraspil exists to me. So Pete's got idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It's involved scarring on his lungs. He will die from this disease. It will not get better. And he's very, very long outlived his prognosis. This disease should have killed him a long time ago. And through the special access program in Canada here, which is this new exemption scheme that we've had for the last few years. So patients appealing with the support of their physicians to access psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA You have to have tried and failed every single other resource. So people like Pete, who are at end of life, are being told, oh, you want to try psilocybin? Okay, you got to go try and fail at least 2 antidepressants. You got to try and fail electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy, these frontline, as they might say, resources before you can even be considered to try psilocybin.
So you have to continue to be scared of passing after having an antidepressant, after doing that other. Seriously?
Yeah, and you have to prove that
because there's any research that those things have ever stopped the fear of passing.
I mean, yes and no, I suppose. But at the same time, like things like electroconvulsive therapy, we've seen have been quite vilified. Like, everyone has an idea of what it looks like to have shocks in your brain. The reality is that electroshock therapy has a place in psychotherapy and psychiatry. Like, it can be very useful for people.
Sure.
It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But to tell someone that they have to try that before trying a mushroom, for fear that the mushroom might be too dangerous for them because it lacks the requisite clinical study, is absolutely crazy.
That is ridiculous. Yes.
Pistol Pete was denied access to psilocybin after waiting for a year with his condition. He could have died at any point during that year from his disease. And one of the reasons that they gave was that they couldn't determine the extent to which he is actually dying. So they said, we acknowledge that the disease you have is a terminal disease and it will kill you, but we can't figure out when it will kill you. So you need to be imminently dying. And to what extent that is imminent, we don't really know. So is it like his physician was like, does it need to be 1 month, 2 months, 1 week? What does that mean? So he got denied. And then about 3 weeks later, got a MAID approval. So he was approved for medical assistance in dying to end his life legally through a subsidized government program. So you are too sick to live. So we'll give you this killer cure.
But you're not sick enough to take a mushroom that people have been taking for thousands of years.
Yeah. And so a part of the reason that the framed reason for denying people access to psilocybin is an abundance of caution for their safety. We don't know what psilocybin might do to you. You're at end of life. You have these really complex issues. And they say, well, thanks for the concern, but I'm fucking dying here. So I don't care about your concern. I've got the support of my doctor and my healthcare team. Let me do this.
Let me do this.
And so Pistol, not wanting to die, he really wanted MAID as he's that anxious. He's like, I might consider ending my life because I'm in such a bad state. So he doesn't want to use MAID though. So he pursued psychedelic therapy from an underground resource.
Yep. And
that is the subject of this podcast, is him talking about his incredible experience and how he couldn't wait for the government to let him down again.
Oh.
He just wanted to use these substances. So yeah, on the one hand, so thrilled that he's had the experience and that it was a good one for him and that he's found some peace. Yeah. But on the other, Pete's story is what so many people deal with. Too sick to live, not sick enough to try a mushroom. That's a problem. And I've said the cognitive dissonance, there's a pretty big level of cognitive dissonance there from these bureaucrats of the government who are deciding this.
There really is. Down here, we didn't have MDMA therapy approved in August of 2024. I was devastated because I know how many people it can help just with the kind of trauma that I experienced. And one of the things I know that's going to happen is that when it gets approved in the US, it's going to be outrageously expensive, which is just going to mean the underground is going to stay just as robust as it currently is. The same kind of hoops that you talk about with Pete, and I just don't think bureaucrats understand. I think if you haven't been in a PTSD cycle, if you aren't facing a chronic illness, if you aren't facing a terminal illness, if you aren't coming back from battle, you just don't get it. And yet they're the ones, and very few of them have experience, if they'll even admit it, with a particular substance. So everything's demonized. I was going to ask you, how, if somebody in the States wants to come up and experience psilocybin therapy for end of life, how do they do that? But now it sounds like that's not there's still all these different hoops to jump through.
Yeah. So I as an advocate, I need to point out these issues, these failures in policy. And the story that I've told could probably paint a bit of a negative picture, I admit, about how the special access program works.
Well, just realistic. Yeah, just realistic. Yeah.
It's realistic. But on the other side of things, it does work for a lot of people.
Yes.
A lot of people can access psychedelics through SAP. And that is the program that, for better or for worse, we are working under. And so we've tried to perfect our own systems to ensure that people can access these substances. So we've seen that folks from the States have been coming up to Canada to access psychedelics through the special access program.
Gotcha.
Like definitely. These are stopgap solutions, I think, by the government. I think that many know that psychedelics don't belong in SAP. And for maybe a bit more context about SAP, special access, this is a program that's been around for a very long time. It's emergency access medicines. So the reason why people have to try and fail these other drugs before they can try psychedelics is because that's the standard for these other substances. Exactly. So it has a place, I think, for sure. Like, for example, if someone wants to use an experimental drug, let's say that's not legal in Canada but is legal in other countries, their physician can say, I think we should try this. My patients failed all these other drugs. Let's try this other one. That makes sense, I think, for a lot of things. It does not make sense for psychedelics. This is surely not a last resort for people. I mean, I don't know that will change for a while, that people have to try and fail other substances first before trying psilocybin or MDMA or any other psychedelic. But at least, and we were just chatting about this before we jumped on, Jill, that at least Canada has this program. Like we do at least have some sort of acknowledgement that for some people, psychedelics could be useful. We're just hoping that we'd maybe trust doctors a bit more, that if they're going through the efforts of, it's not easy to apply to SAP. There's a lot of paperwork involved. If a physician is making it through that whole process, taking time out of their day to support their patients, maybe we need to trust people that went to school for this and not a bureaucrat at the government offices in Ottawa. So
Preach.
We're getting there, though. We're getting there. It's slow. People are coming to the realization that these programs need to change, and that we need to trust our doctors. We're getting there, slowly but surely.
And I think it's really important that voices like yours, we're having these podcasts, we're having these conversations, that people who've never even had a psychedelic conversation can start to hear about these things and realize that there's a lot of help that can happen for folks. And so if anybody out there is listening, please, an internet search will take you to Johns Hopkins research. It'll take you to Robert Carhart Harris. John and I are not talking about just our experiences and, hey, trust us. There is clinical research. In the States, we have clinicalgov.com. It's got over 300 clinical trials dealing with psychedelics, many of which around anxiety. I haven't looked for end of life, but I guarantee there's something going on there. So this is not going to be niche. I would anticipate within 5 years, this is not going to be niche at all. It's going to be much more widespread, hopefully easier to access. I would say that I think it's kind of ridiculous at how much it can improve the quality of life, that we have to wait till someone only has like 2 months of life. That's just ridiculous to me. All right. Anyway, John, I have so many questions about the facilitator program and things of that sort. We might wind up connecting offline about that because I'm in so many groups with other facilitators. But my question for you, other than my curiosity, what questions should I have asked you today? What am I missing? What haven't I seen?
It's such a good question. Maybe like what's the most underrated part about psychedelic therapy or something?
Oh.
Like what's something that people don't often consider?
Okay.
Yeah. So I think in our culture, we tend to look for quick fixes. So how can I take a pill and feel better? And I'm not vilifying that point of view. I think it'd be awesome if we could do that. But I think that's realized in the pharmaceutical situation that we have here. I take a pill every day and I'll feel that little bit better. And that works for a lot of people. But that's not really how psychedelics work in my experience. There is microdosing, these kind of invisible improvements. But what we're talking about here are
we're talking about a flood dose or a macro dose.
Yeah, these psychedelic therapies, what's really underrated or perhaps under discussed, I think, is that the work really happens after you take the psychedelic. That I feel like people say it's like 10% experience, 90% after experience.
Absolutely.
And preparation. So
Yep.
we're talking about the preparation and the integration of these experiences. The session gets all the attention, because you're having these massive experiences and going places you've never been before and seeing and hearing things that you've never imagined. But it's when someone starts living differently afterwards because of what they've experienced that I think is really underrated.
Yes.
That the work is, Maria Sabina, the shaman, she says you are the medicine. So the psychedelic just shows you for those few hours what the potential is inside of you. And then it's afterwards that you have that self-discovery. Yeah. And maybe one other thing, which is that you kind of touched on, which it's not something that you missed in asking me, Jill, but rather that something that's really gratifying about working in the psychedelic space, talking to people like yourself and just having these conversations. We talk about woo-woo and is this go too far?
Right.
One thing that's really nice about working with psychedelics is that they work. We're not selling snake oil to people. These aren't imagined conversations. These are real stories. This is not only in like personal experiences and these anecdotes that we've discussed, but the clinical research tells its own story.
Yes.
Like we are not selling something that won't potentially help people.
Right.
Like psychedelics have a place.
Right.
So both of those statements I think are underrated and people need to consider them more, that these ought not to be like under discussed. We need to talk about psychedelics more. We need more people understanding what's out there.
Understanding the potential. When my therapist said to me, "You've got PTSD," and of course she didn't say it like that. She's much nicer than I am. You've got PTSD. The antidepressant isn't working. The talk therapy, we're not when your patient says, one more bad thing, I'm out. I'm taking a hint from the universe. Your therapist, her ears kind of perk up, and she was the one who suggested psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, very specifically with MDMA first, because I had huge trust and fear issues. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Have you met me? I was like corporate girl, da da da. It was the clinical research. At the time, we were at 2 clinical trials. And if it hadn't been for that research, I never would have said yes. It just was so far outside of my sphere. And so that's one of my passions with having these conversations with folks like you and your organization, that people like me, the Jills of 10 years ago, can start to understand there is this potential solution. There's a whole bunch of variety. I love that you're branching out into MDMA work, especially for folks who are dealing with fear, and that let's start investigating from a place of curiosity and discovery versus I saw a commercial in the 80s made by politicians to convince me to do something, and that was really a story. And I think the other thing, I love what you said about, the 10% is the journey and the other 90%. I do like 40, 20, 40 is kind of the way I describe it. But one of the ways, like, how do you know if your therapy or your journey has been helpful? It's whatever that trigger is the second Thursday from the journey. That coworker that always reminded you of your mother and you kind of got all fired up, or that person in traffic that reminded you of when you got something or other. How do you react to that? Because if your behavior and your response is different, that's the evidence that it's working for you. And people are always like, what are you talking about? And then they experience it and they're like, yeah, this happened and it didn't even upset me. I'm like, really? So I always do the 2 weeks after on a Tuesday when something random happens and you don't respond the way that you would normally.
Or even like 2 years later too.
Oh yeah.
It's like, I've had psychedelic experiences that are like, I just turned 30 and like my first psychedelic experience, I was 18, and I still sometimes like, oh my God. And I think back to something that I thought about that day, or I relive it in some way in the present. So you feel like you're always experiencing them all over again.
Part of it.
Not in like a flashback kind of way, but like in a realization kind of way.
Oh, same way it's a memory. You're going back. John, this has been a very serious conversation and also a delightful conversation. And for a time in our life that we all have to face, to have the potential to make it a much more peaceful transition, I think is really of value. How can people find you? We're going to put everything in the show notes, but for those out there who are listening, where can people find you?
People can find us on social media, but also on our website. So if you search up Psychedelic Therapy Canada, we will come up, but we are Therasil, which stands for therapeutic psilocybin. I'll leave it up to the folks at home to think about how that's spelled, but I'm sure you can find us one way or another. We have a newsletter. We host like monthly webinars, and I'd love to chat with anyone that's listening about the training, the advocacy work, but also something that we didn't really discuss today, which is a clinical trial that Theraspil is launching as well, which is for general wellness. So we're researching if psilocybin can help people be generally more well. We believe that the jury's out. Psychedelics help people at the end of life and anxiety and depression. Can we help people feel a little bit better every day for normal everyday experiences?
Oh, absolutely.
There's a lot to be discovered through our tiny nonprofit.
Oh my gosh. Well, is that already posted on your website? I'll absolutely repost that to my network.
It is. Okay. Therapsil.ca/clinical trial. You'll be able to see it there.
Oh, super, super. John, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure, and I have a funny feeling we'll be chatting soon at another time.
I sincerely hope so. It's been great for me. Thank you for having me.
So that was a big conversation. And if there's one thing I hope that you're taking away from this, it's that these therapies aren't just about feeling better. They're about changing how someone experiences some of the hardest moments of being human. So if you like this content, please feel free to like and subscribe to this channel. And if you're interested in more psychedelic culture, music, art, written pieces, head on over to psychedelicscene.com. And if you like that content, consider purchasing our founder, Jason, a little cup of coffee with a little donation button, because Jason keeps the lights on 24/7 and he's running the whole show. So with that said, until next time, family, take care.